Welcome to the next lecture of American Government 1. I'm your host, Dr. Michael Beggs, and our topic this week is campaigns and elections. Election campaigns. The words that the media uses to describe campaigns highlights conflict. For starters, what is a campaign? The first definition that the Oxford Dictionary returns is an organized course of action to achieve a goal. Example, the election campaign. While the second is a connected series of military operations forming a distinct phase of a war. Example, the bombing campaign. A campaign is an effort by a political candidate to win support of donors, activists, and voters to win an election. Campaign structure. All election campaigns have a structure that is organized to help them achieve its goal, winning an election. A well structured campaign allows for efficient coordination of people, resources, and messaging. First, there's the candidate themselves as the face and voice of the campaign and their family. The candidate attends events, delivers speeches, participates in debates, and engages with voters. The campaign manager is the chief executive of the campaign who oversees all aspects of the campaign, from strategy, staffing, scheduling, budgeting, to communications with the media. The communications team is responsible for message development and controlling the campaign's public image. This team includes a communication director to oversee the team and strategy, a press secretary to handle media relations and prepare press releases, speechwriters, and social media managers. The field operation team focuses on voter outreach and grassroots mobilization. Grassroots mobilization focuses on building support and taking action from the bottom up, relying on ordinary people and volunteers to increase support for a campaign. The field operation team relies on volunteers and activists at the neighborhood or local level to spread the message through door to door canvassing, phone banking, and texting, registering new voters, holding town halls or small local events, and distributing campaign materials. The finance and fundraising team raise and manage campaign funds, which are critical to any effort to win a campaign. The rest of the campaign team includes a digital and technology team, policy and research team, legal team to ensure compliance with election laws and legal challenges, the scheduling and advance team that plans and coordinates the candidates' travel and event logistics. Campaign activities. Fundraising. Fundraising is a crucial component of any campaign because it provides the financial resources needed to support a wide range of campaign operations, such as advertising, staff salaries, travel, events, and voter outreach. Since running for office is expensive, candidates begin raising money early, and many spend more time soliciting donations than engaging in any other kind of campaign activity. Serious fundraising efforts include trying to appeal to both large and small donors. Once elected, members of Congress find it easier to wring campaign funds because of the incumbency advantage, where most interest group contributions and political action committee donations go to incumbents. There are many ways to raise funds for a political campaign. The campaign can solicit donations by sending letters or postcards to potential donors, often targeting supporters who have donated in the past. Volunteers or campaign staff can also call or text potential supporters to ask for contributions. And then there's email, where the campaign will send personalized or mass emails asking for donations, often with urgent messaging or deadlines. Campaigns also host fundraising events such as house parties, community dinners, or meet and greets where supporters can donate to attend, or through exclusive dinners or receptions with high profile guests, often with minimum donation requirements. Since COVID, campaigns have been hosting virtual fundraisers online using Zoom or other live streaming platforms. Digital fundraising is where campaigns through their websites raise money with secure donation portals. The online aspect of fundraising can be promoted by using platforms like Facebook, Instagram, and X to drive traffic to donation links. Fundraising activities must comply with campaign finance laws, like the Federal Election Commission rules, and they must track and report contributions, including donor names, amounts, and dates, especially for contributions over a certain threshold. Polling. Polling plays a vital role in political campaigns, providing data driven insights that help candidates make informed decisions throughout the election cycle. All campaigns for national and statewide offices make extensive use of random sample public opinion polling of likely or registered voters. These polls provide the campaign with critical information that they will need to win the election. First, early polling helps to determine whether voters are familiar with the candidate. If name recognition is low, the campaign may focus on branding, biography ads, and public appearances. Next in importance, polls help campaigns understand what issues matter most to voters, such as the economy, healthcare, or immigration. Candidates then tailor their messaging and platform to align with voter priorities. Polls show who's leading or trailing in the race and by how much, and they can track support across demographics like age, gender, ethnicity, and the regions to define outreach strategies. Polling data is also used to identify swing voters or persuadable groups to allow for more efficient use of resources, such as focusing ads or door to door knocking efforts in areas with undecided voters. Tracking polls conducted regularly show how voter attitudes change over time, and the politicians can use this data to adjust tactics if support is rising or falling. Polling results are also used to influence media coverage and narratives, shape public opinion, energize supporters, or attract donors. In short, polling acts as a campaign's compass, guiding strategy, measuring effectiveness, and helping allocate time, money, and energy where it will matter the most. Campaign message. Polling also helps the campaign develop their message. Candidates must communicate to the voters their position or message on the issues important to the constituents. To create an effective campaign message, the candidate must consider the following two things. What is their record on the issues their constituents care about? And does the candidate's record on these issues mirror those of the electorate? The depth of a candidate's record or lack thereof will determine whether the message is either positive or negative. The strongest influence over the message is the extent of the candidate's record on an issue versus their opponent. If the candidate has a stronger record, then they will adopt a positive message. If the opponent has a stronger record, then they will adopt a negative message. Other factors that can influence the message are the competitiveness of the race. If the race isn't competitive, then the candidate will stay with a positive message. But if it's close, going negative can help move the polls. Going negative is defined as talking about the opponent in a less than flattering manner. Voters are more accepting of negative messages if the topic is considered relevant to governing. The influence of negative messages may be due more to coverage of negative ads in the media rather than the ads themselves. Another significant influence over the message is the traditional party ownership of the issues. The two political parties have carefully crafted stereotypes on which issues they are better suited to solve. Candidates frame their campaign rhetoric to increase the salience of the public's historical perspective of their party on these issues. Each party has crafted an image and reputation with the public for being better suited to deal with a particular issue. That is, Democrats, social welfare issues, and Republicans, foreign policy issues. Media strategy. A media strategy is the plan of a political campaign uses to communicate its messages to voters through various media channels, such as television, radio, print, social media, and online platforms. The goal is to influence public opinion, increase name and recognition, highlight key issues, and ultimately win votes. The key elements of a campaign media strategy is to define the message and then to repeat it consistently across all media platforms. Next, the campaign must identify its target audience or who they want to reach. For example, undecided voters, young voters, suburban women, specific ethnic groups. And then they must tailor the message to the habits and concerns of these groups. Depending on their target audience, the campaign must choose the right media to reach them. For older voters, that is the traditional media using TV, radio, or print ads. And for younger voters, it might include social media, online ads, or email and text messaging. Of course, most of these media forms cost money, so the campaign also focuses on free media coverage through news stories, interviews, press releases, and public events. The campaign will hold press conferences and participate in debates because these can generate significant media attention. See June 2024 presidential debate. Debates provide an opportunity to see candidates outside the campaign bubble. Candidates can make or break their campaigns on the strength of their performance during a debate. Gaze, facial expressions, and unconscious gestures may sway public opinion. A strong media strategy will attempt to have a balance of both paid and free media. They will carefully time their efforts around key moments during the campaign, such as campaign launch announcements, debates, voting deadlines, or early voting periods, with ad buys and messaging increasing as the election nears. In essence, a campaign media strategy is about using the right platforms with the right message at the right time to reach and persuade voters. Elections. Elections in the United States occur on fixed dates, as opposed to the often irregularly scheduled elections in proportional systems. Presidential elections happen once every 4 years, and congressional elections are held every 2 years. When congressional elections are held that do not coincide with a presidential election, they are called midterm elections. Both occur on the first Tuesday following the first Monday in November in even numbered years. State and local elections may or may not coincide with national elections. Administration of elections. State and local governments are primarily responsible for running elections, which includes the following aspects. They determine who will run the election, the electoral district boundaries, and the candidate qualifications. State and local governments establish and staff polling places, process mail in ballots, and determine and verify voter eligibility. Types of elections. To start off the campaign, each party must first select a candidate. The primary or caucus is an election held to select a party's candidate for the general election. There are two types of primaries: closed primaries, where only voters of the party in which they are registered as can participate, and open primaries, where all registered voters, including independents, can participate. If no candidate receives an absolute majority in a primary, over 50%, a runoff election is held between the top two candidates. Each party is responsible for organizing and conducting its own primary or caucus. The general election follows the primary elections and determines who is ultimately elected to the office. The winner of the general election is elected to office for a specific term. Electoral systems. An electoral system is the set of rules and processes that determine how votes are cast, counted, and how a candidate wins. The key aspects of the electoral system include the following: how people vote, for example, paper ballots, electronic machines, mail in voting; how choices are presented to the voters, vote for one candidate or rank the candidates; whether the election is held in single member districts, one representative per area, or multi member districts; and the vote counting rules. Plurality voting, which is whoever gets the most votes wins, or majority voting, where you must get over 50% of the votes cast to win. The majority voting rules are used in some primaries and caucuses and in the presidential election. We'll cover more on this later. The plurality voting rules, referred to as a single district winner take all system, are used in all congressional races except in Maine and Alaska, who use ranked choice voting. The ballot. The history of the ballot in American elections reflects the evolution of voting from a public, partisan activity to a private, standardized, and secure process. The ballot has changed significantly over time. In the mid 1800s, political parties began printing party ballots, often in distinct colors or formats that only listed their candidates for office. Voters would choose the ballot from their preferred party and place it in the ballot box. This encouraged straight ticket voting or selecting candidates from the same party for all offices on the ballot. This method reinforced partisan control over the process and lacked any voter privacy. By the turn of the 20th century, party ballots had been replaced by ballots prepared by the government. This development brought about the adoption of the Australian ballot or long form ballot. The Australian ballot includes the names of all candidates from all parties running for each election. Ballots were cast in secret instead of using a public ballot box. Massachusetts was the first state to adopt the long form ballot in 1888, followed by others in the next few years. This reform promoted voter privacy, reduced fraud, and weakened party control over voting. Red versus blue. In the late 1800s and early 1900s, bosses of political parties in South Texas color coded ballots red and blue for Republican and Democrat in order to assist illiterate or non English speaking voters at the polls. The colors eventually came to represent the respective parties. State and local governments, not the federal government, conduct the elections and are responsible for creating the ballots. Generally, there are two types of ballots: paper ballots and computerized balloting systems. Why is the ballot and its format important? 537 votes is all that separated Gore and Bush when, on November 26, 2000, 3 weeks after Election Day, the state of Florida declared Bush the winner of its 25 electoral votes in the race for U.S. president. In the 36 days that followed, Americans learned that Gore had won the popular vote by 543,895 votes, but it's winning the Electoral College that counts. The ballots themselves became an issue of contention. Look at the picture for a second. The visually confusing paper punch card or butterfly ballot, in which two columns of candidate names were separated by a middle column with marks to be punched through, was blamed for some Gore votes going to Pat Buchanan due to a misalignment of the names and marks. And then some of those marks failed to get properly punched through. Hanging chads is what they were called. Election officials had to devise standards by which to count the ballots with the hanging chads. Do you count it as a valid vote as long as there is some evidence that a voter tried to cast a vote? Do you only count it if three of the four corners are knocked out, or something in between? No consistent standard was developed, which was a key issue in the case Bush versus Gore that came before the Supreme Court. The Florida Supreme Court ordered a recount of undervotes in all Florida's 67 counties, which was quickly appealed by Bush, and the case headed to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court, in a 7-2 decision, determined that Florida recount, as it was being conducted, was unconstitutional on the grounds that there were no clear standards that were being applied consistently to all ballots. Then, by a 5-4 vote, the court declared that time had run out to devise a remedy. That stopped the process, with Bush ahead. With the Florida win, Bush led Gore in electoral votes nationally, 271 votes to 266, and out of legal options, Gore conceded. Later that year, the New York Times did a comprehensive review of the uncounted Florida ballots from the presidential election. They determined that Bush would have won even if the Supreme Court had allowed the statewide manual recount of the votes that the Florida Supreme Court had ordered to go forward. Electoral districts. The president represents the entire country. Senators represent entire states, but members of the House of Representatives represent geographical districts within states. Because representation in the House is set by population, a census is conducted every 10 years and each state's representation is adjusted to reflect any changes. The process of reapportionment is where Congress determines each state House representation. The process of redrawing the districts to reflect adding or subtracting the numbers of congressional representatives is known as redistricting. Since this is a highly political act that can determine the balance of power in Congress, there have been numerous legal challenges to redistricting. In the case Baker versus Carr in 1962, the Supreme Court ruled that federal courts can intervene in drawing of these legislative districts. Later, the court ruled that state legislative and congressional districts must be roughly equal in population, adhering to the principle of one person, one vote. As of 2020, each U.S. House district has an average population of 761,169. Gerrymandering. As noted previously, the drawing of legislative districts is highly political, and the party that controls the process gets a partisan advantage. Gerrymandering is a strategy of drawing legislative districts to favor a political party. Politicians from one party strategically manipulate district boundaries to disadvantage the other party. The term comes from the name of a 19th century Massachusetts governor, Elbridge Gerry. Gerry allegedly drew a district in the shape of a salamander, hence the mandering. There are a couple of ways to gerrymander a district. You can disperse voters of one party into two or more districts, diluting that voting potential. It's also known as cracking. Or you can concentrate voters of one party into as few districts as possible, or packing, which also dilutes their votes statewide. These two practices results in safe districts where there is little two-party competition. The court has ruled that extreme or racial gerrymandering is unconstitutional, but has not agreed on how to measure or define it. In Rucho versus Common Cause, the Supreme Court ruled that federal courts cannot hear claims of partisan gerrymandering due to the lack of judicially manageable standards for determining when partisan advantage is unconstitutional. Court found that partisan gerrymandering claims present political questions beyond the scope of federal judicial review. The court stated that partisan gerrymandering has existed since prior to the independence of the United States, and aware of this occurrence, the framers chose to empower state legislatures, expressly checked and balanced by the federal Congress, to handle these matters. While federal courts can resolve a variety of questions surrounding districting, including racial gerrymandering, it is beyond our power to decide the central question: when has political gerrymandering gone too far? In the absence of any limited and precise standard for evaluating partisan gerrymandering, federal courts cannot resolve such issues. The Supreme Court has generally been opposed to the creation of majority minority districts, which is a district in which the majority of the constituents belong to a racial or ethnic majority. While the court is opposed, most majority minority districts occur naturally in states or geographical areas with large minority populations. Each state legislature is responsible for redistricting, and some states have turned this process over to supposed nonpartisan commissions. The founders understood that redistricting would require political accountability, which is why they gave that task to the state legislatures from the beginning. Legislatures that performed the task poorly or corruptly could be voted out of office, while unelected nonpartisan commissioners cannot. Gerrymandering goes back 2 centuries and has been used by both parties to establish political and electoral support. Passing off critical functions of representative democracy to unaccountable bureaucrats is neither good government nor good governance, however. This task should be handled by elected officials accountable to voters. Presidential nomination process. The first stage in a presidential election is the nomination phase, which involves primary elections and caucuses. Results from each state's primary or caucus determine how its delegates will vote at their party's national convention. Delegates are individuals who represent their state or community at their party's presidential nomination committee. It is the majority of delegates to the national party conventions who select the presidential nominees. The delegates also approve the party's platform and adopt rules governing the party. The Democrats have about 3,900 voting delegates for the first ballot at the convention, and more than 4,600 for subsequent rounds of voting if necessary. Republicans have 2,429 delegates voting at the convention. Delegates can be divided into two broad categories for each party. For the Democrats, they are either pledged or unpledged, and for the Republicans, they are either bound or unbound. Pledged and bound delegates must vote for a particular presidential candidate at the convention based on the results of the primary or caucus in their state. Unpledged and unbound delegates may support any presidential candidate regardless of the primary or caucus results in their state or local district. On the Democratic side, unpledged delegates may not vote on the first ballot in a closely contested race, but are free to vote for any candidate in subsequent rounds of voting. All Democratic governors, U.S. senators, and representatives, current and former Democratic National Committee chairs, and former presidents serve as unpledged delegates. The two parties have different approaches in determining exactly how delegates are allocated to the candidates. For Republicans, state parties are mostly free to determine how to award delegates to a presidential candidate based off their primary performance. The most common delegate allocation methods are proportional. Candidates get awarded delegates based off their proportion of the vote. Then there's winner take all, where the candidate that won the primary gets all the delegate, or there's a hybrid of the two. Democrats have a standardized rule. Candidates win delegates in proportion to their share of the statewide primary vote. Candidates must receive at least 15% of the statewide vote to qualify for any statewide delegates, and at least 15% of votes in a congressional district to qualify for delegates in that district. The presidential nomination process today has become front loaded. Front loading refers to when states vie to increase their political influence by holding their primaries or caucuses earlier in the year. Early primaries and caucuses have high levels of national media coverage, candidate campaign ads, and intensive voter mobilization drives. Early voting states are important because they help candidates secure national media attention, contributions, and higher ratings in public opinion polls. A candidate who fares poorly in these early voting states may be written off as a loser and have to drop out of the race. The Electoral College. The Electoral College is a system we use to elect the president and the vice president. Instead of voting directly for a candidate, Americans vote for a group of electors who are then cast official votes for the president and vice president. The system was created by the Constitution's Article 2, Section 1, and was refined by the 12th Amendment. It was designed as a compromise between electing the president by a vote in Congress and a direct popular vote by the people. The Electoral College was intended to balance the influence of a large and small states and to limit the direct power of the majority. The total number of electors is determined by the number of congressional representatives. There are 538 total electors, 435 from the House of Representatives, 100 from the Senate, and 3 for Washington, D.C., per the 23rd Amendment. Each state gets electors equal to its total number of senators, plus its number of representatives, which varies by population. When citizens vote in November, they are actually voting for a slate of electors pledged to a presidential candidate. In December, electors meet in their state capital to cast their votes for president and vice president. Votes are then sent to the vice president and Congress. In early January, Congress meets to officially count the votes and declare the winner. In 48 states and D.C., the candidate who wins the popular vote in the state gets all its electoral votes. It is a winner take all system, except in Maine and Nebraska, which uses a proportional system where the electoral votes are split by congressional district and statewide vote. A candidate for president needs a majority, 270 electoral votes to win. Direct democracy elections. There are no direct democracy options open to Americans to influence the national government, but various states do have them. The statewide initiative and referendum, also known as ballot measures, are a form of direct democracy. 24 states have an initiative process, which is where a proposed law or state constitutional amendment is added to the ballot by citizens or interest groups for a popular vote to ratify it. All 50 states provide for some form of legislative referendum, which is where a law proposed by a legislature that is referred to the public for a vote of approval or rejection. Some states permit recall elections that allows voters to remove state officials from office before their terms expire. Some recalls of governors include the removal of California Governor Greg Davis in 2003, and in 2012, Wisconsin Governor Scott Walker won a recall election and remained in office. How voters decide. The success of any campaign is influenced by a variety of factors, including a candidate's characteristics, status as an incumbent or challenger, and partisan loyalty. A candidate's characteristics can strongly influence how people vote because voters often respond to personal traits as well as political positions. The candidate's charisma, confidence, and likability can help a candidate connect with voters, and voters may prefer candidates who seem authentic, trustworthy, or strong leaders. Candidates with prior political, military, or executive experience may be seen as more qualified, and those voters with a shared background often will trust those politicians more. Candidate demographic factors also matter to voters. Race, gender, age, religion, or region can play a role as voters sometimes feel a personal or cultural connection to candidates who resemble them or share their views. Voters also often consider whether a candidate appears honest, ethical, and consistent in their values. Scandals or contradictions in personal character can undermine the sport. The politician who is currently in office is called the incumbent, and the incumbency advantage refers to the significant edge that they have over challengers in an election. This advantage is especially strong in congressional elections, where over 80% of incumbents typically win re election. One reason for this advantage includes name recognition, where voters are more likely to recognize and trust a familiar name. Incumbents also have easier access to fundraising networks, staff, and media coverage. Members of Congress can send official mail to constituents for free, helping them stay visible. More importantly, incumbents can help their constituents who have problems with the federal agencies building goodwill, and they can bring funding or projects, pork barrel spending to their district, thereby winning support. Incumbents often appear more qualified due to legislative experience, and they have a track record, while challengers are often unknowns with little record to run on. However, partisan loyalty is the most reliable indicator of which candidates people will vote for. Money in elections. In Buckley versus Vallejo, 1976, the court introduced the idea that money is speech, and this allowed unlimited spending by candidates on their own campaigns, but left intact a provision of the law that limits individual campaign contributions. In Citizen United versus the Federal Election Commission in 2010, the court ruled that independent spending by corporations is protected speech. That decision led to the emergence of super PACs, which are classified as independent expenditure only political action committees who can raise and spend unlimited amounts of money to advocate for or against candidates as long as they do not coordinate directly with the campaigns. Individual donors are solicited through direct mail, phone, and the internet, and face to face contact, and their contributions are limited to $2,800 per candidate per election, 5,000 per federal PAC per calendar year, 35,000 per national party committee per calendar year, and $10,000 to state and local committees per calendar per year. So, what influence does money have on election outcomes? Does money in politics exacerbate the public perception of corruption? Yes, but money does not always equal success in elections. Consider that Michael R. Bloomberg, former mayor of New York City and billionaire, spent more than 900 million on his failed bid for the White House in 2020. He spent more than 500 million in television advertising and 100 million on digital ads during the course of his roughly 100-day campaign. Bloomberg spent tens of millions of dollars more on a raft of media consultants, pollsters, and digital strategists. His lone victory was in the faraway territory of American Samoa, and he secured only 58 delegates at a cost of more than $15 million apiece. So while money is necessary to campaign for office, a candidate will need more than a lot of cash to win. The end.